Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our April webinar on energizing business development. Just to reassure me, can somebody just say hi and tell me, please, that voice and video and slides are all working? Because for some reason my slides bombed a moment ago. Are you seeing slides? Great. Good. Thanks, everyone. It's just reassuring to know I'm not talking to myself for the next hour. Welcome to this month's webinar. Glad to see you, Brigitte. See you're well again. Good. When I'm looking that way, I'm looking at you. When I'm looking at that way, I'm looking at the slides. So here we go. We have quite a lot to cover, so let's dive in. 6 parts to today's webinar. I'm going to open by talking about what I call the BizDev roller coaster, the swings and arrows of outrageous fortune that many of you will be well familiar with, and obviously some of the typical issues that creates. Now, I'm not going to spend too long on that, but it's perhaps useful to at least take 10 minutes to share some of the issues, and feel free to use the chat box to share the ones that apply to you. One of the things that happened last month is the chat box actually became the substance of the webinar, and very often what gets shared there between people is just as valuable, if not more so, than what's on slides, because it's your real human experience. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about how self-worth is a significant game changer in business development for very specific reasons that I will come to. And then we will illustrate that as it applies in meetings. And finally, as promised in the correspondence that preceded this webinar, we look at some of the practical actions, the things you can put in your diary, or the habits, if you like, that you can build, which on a foundation of self-worth help to energize your business development. Okay, let's dive in. The roller coaster, familiar to many, no doubt. The typical pattern looks something like this. John leaves his corporate job and initially is all excited and full of euphoria at the prospect of having no boss, of having total flexi time, and going to networking meetings whenever he likes it. This carries on for 3 to 6 months, depending on how gregarious you are. And then sooner or later, we hit the first change of direction on the curve, when either there is a setback or a rejection, or maybe just a deafening silence coming from the marketplace, which is consuming our brand new blog or our brand new materials with apparent interest, but then nothing happens. That's a fairly ubiquitous experience in today's rather crowded marketplace. As a result of which, we can, particularly if we've poured a lot of energy into our baby, we can experience a slump, a depression, a degree of exhaustion, and many other bells and whistles based on that. And if we're lucky enough, and if we stay in business long enough, and I might even add stay healthy long enough, sooner or later we get our lucky break and there is some kind of recovery for those who survive that. And then comes in a way, the hardest part, which is that cycle very often repeats itself over and over again. As one man put it to me some years ago, I've not so much had 10 years experience as an independent, I've had 2 years experience 5 times over. Because that familiar cycle of feast and famine, that particularly, he was an interim manager, that particular cycle of very busy contract followed by nothing, followed by very busy contract followed by nothing, that cycle repeated itself over and over again. And because it's a roller coaster, this has some implications. One is you need a really deep friendship with yourself, whether you are on the up or on the down. And it's it's in the bits and pieces of every day, to borrow that phrase from the poet, was it Gerald? No, it was Patrick Kavanagh. The little bits and pieces of every day, that's when we need that close friendship with ourselves during those ups and downs. And that's when it's really important to actually enjoy the ride. because we will have to do things we don't want to do. We will have to do things we don't like doing. And for some it's admin, and for others it's networking, and for others it's social media. You know, that's the name of the game. But whatever we're doing, let's at least enjoy the process. So what are some of the typical issues? I'm going to focus on about 4 or 5 of them. Top of the list, I think, for many, particularly those who are a little bit on the introverted side, is this whole networking marketing thing. It's like what I often hear on coaching calls, particularly in the beginning of our work together, somebody will say, well, what I dream about is somebody to come into the business and just sell my services or sell our services so that all I have to do is turn up and deliver. It's a very, very fond dream. And dream is the key word here, because the sum of experience of people actually trying to do that is not very promising, I'm afraid. For every 1 or 2 success stories, I hear at least 20 stories of someone who tried that, but it didn't work out. They often lost a lot of money in the process. So there is no avoiding marketing, and there's no avoiding networking if you are serious about business development. I love the work, but not getting it, as Mary just summed it up. Perfect description. Getting the work is part of the work. You know, that's the way it is. Let's try and figure out ways in which that gets more enjoyable. Second issue is purely an energy one, and it's to do with ever more demanding clients who are well aware they're in a buyer's market these days. And therefore, they tend to give you the very demanding, difficult projects that they either cannot do in-house or don't want to do in-house, or you know, in other ways they need you as a consultant, a trainer, whatever, interim manager, whatever it might be. As a result of which, they may feel they have a hold on you all the time. As a result of which, they can take all your available energy. And therefore, if we get to that, you know, particularly if you tend to leave your business development to Friday, which is a habit that I usually coach people away from, because that's not a good day for doing business development for reasons I'll come to, I'll come to now. You know, if you have a client emergency on Thursday evening, or you haven't managed to complete everything that you wanted to by Thursday, and you had planned to do your business dev on Friday, guess what's going to happen on Friday? And even if that isn't true, it's quite possible that you'd rather play golf on Friday rather than tackle that business development challenge. Just reading a comment from Ian that says he doesn't trust anyone else to accurately sell his expertise. Frankly, Ian, neither do I. The best they can do, perhaps, is tell a part of our story or share some of our insights. At the end of the day, we tend to just have to reconcile ourselves with selling ourselves. And moving right in, you know, building on that, this sense of not feeling ready. For some, this manifests as always needing the next qualification, and the belief that somehow when we've got that qualification, clients will somehow beat a path to our door. Whether that's an academic qualification or the master's in whatever, or the latest program that's come from the US, or whatever it might be, this sense of not feeling ready often sits behind that. For others, it will be a sense of not having enough experience. For still others, it'll be less about qualifications and experience, but more belief about themselves. I sometimes joke with clients on coaching calls about preparation mania. And we all get into it from time to time. You know, I just spent 2 years going through a phase of preparation mania. It had to end. You know, sometimes it might feel justified, but there is a point where we just have to get into the water. Very common issue, setbacks. And by setbacks, I don't just mean the proposal not being accepted. That in a way is such a daily event that, you know, you just have to get used to it, or not getting the interview, or whatever it is. I'm talking about even the more, you know, poisonous kinds, of where somebody promises X but delivers Y, where Y is often quite a lot behind X. People feeling, people maybe that you've trusted, and then they turn out to be not as trustworthy as they were. Many female clients that I work with tell me about the guys who either as recruitment agents or as marketeers or whatever promise wonderful things, but actually they have another agenda. There are many stories of letdown in the marketplace, and you need self-worth sometimes to get over some of these. And not let them poison the effort. And finally, just the sheer amount of work involved, even staying on top of emails, often means we just don't take enough breaks. I became very guilty of this a few years ago when I had a mini burnout in 2014, I think. It's now 5 years ago, simply because I just lost the ability to get away from it. I was immersed so much in what I was doing. No, I just got a very funny noise. Are you still seeing slides? Just checking anyone's out there. All right, thanks, folks. I had a funny kind of chirping noise. Okay, let's move on. So, for many reasons, self-worth is a game changer. There'll always be ups and downs in not only individual client affairs, but just in how the marketplace values your services. One of the conversations I often have in coaching work is, what are you deeply attached to, whether the marketplace wants it or not? Because if everything is contingent, then sometimes we lack the deeper roots. And we need those deeper roots in how we value ourselves. We need those deeper roots to withstand the storms and withstand the tsunamis and shifting winds of today's economy. And for that reason, how we value ourselves is a game changer. And when I talk about how we value ourselves, and for those who have heard me talk about this a lot recently, I promise you I'm not doing the detail today. It's in the book on Amazon, all available for you to read at your own time. But I'm talking about self-worth as opposed to self-esteem. The most jocular version of this, but seems to be the one that everyone remembers. Self-esteem is walking down the street as if you own it. Self-esteem is walking down the street and not caring who owns it. I'm trying to illustrate there the detachment, if you like, from results. And the reason this is quite relevant is that an awful lot of business development is actually self-esteem based. So that means it's conditional. Self-esteem tends to be conditional on our performance or conditional on our results. It's conditional on meeting our expectations of ourselves. So when we're in marketing or we're in business development, or you are, let's say in your first or second year of self-employment, and you experience that it's not as rosy as you thought it was going to be, as many of us have found, then lo and behold, that often creates a self-reproach within that we're somehow not good enough. And it's precisely that kind of conditional thinking that self-worth seeks to get rid of. With self-worth, your focus is on usefulness, not other people's ratings of you or your self-assessments, your ratings of yourself. I cannot emphasize that enough, because we're in a culture that's just so rating obsessed that we are, there's almost the kind of TripAdvisor 5 stars thing hanging around every experience. And what that does is it makes our relationship with ourselves conditional. This is about being interested in the problems of others and how their future might be different, rather than you trying to be interesting. This shift makes networking, for example, very, very easy. Also makes social media quite a different experience. If you approach LinkedIn being interested in what others are sharing, rather than trying to be interesting in what you're sharing, that creates a pretty different approach to the whole game. And most importantly, it helps us to get rid of that often crippling burden of self-reproach, that nagging feeling of not being good enough, As somebody said recently, even though I cannot quite put my finger on why. And it's this, just seen a comment from Brigitte about NGOs. This is hugely relevant to the work of NGOs. But not only. I mean, I've worked with people in the public sector who have exactly these issues. Getting rid of the burden of self-reproach is a huge burden. And as a result of getting rid of that, we're in a position to make better decisions, particularly about clients, when we're not just people-pleasing. So I had a coaching conversation with somebody recently who has a very difficult client. And it was not easy for them to decide what to do, because on the one hand, giving up that client would mean a big gap in revenue in weeks and months to come when there wasn't a ready-made substitute for that client. But working with them presented a lot of challenges and created a bit of a down experience, to be honest. And one of the things that happened when he began to think through the judgments he was making about himself, the self-reproach that went on, because deep down he felt he should, notice that word, he should get rid of the client rather than just stay working with them. And he actually chose not to, because when he got rid of the burden of self-reproach, what it freed him up to do was to take a more dispassionate view of the challenges of that particular customer. He decided that in some ways, some of these challenges could represent growth for his business. Yes, the customer was a pain in the ass. Yes, he can't wait to actually get rid of them and replace them with a better one. But until that day arrives, he's actually going to suspend the self-reproach and stay in there. This is an example of how when we take ourselves out of the picture, when we get out of our own light, we often make better decisions about the direction we're going in. And as a result, it builds trust. Why? Because other people sense that your focus is on them rather than on yourself. And for some, that's a very refreshing experience. Okay, Tommy has raised a question there about how to motivate yourself in biz dev without pumping the self-esteem part of your psychology. That's kind of what all of this is about, Tommy. It's actually discovering that in many ways, business development is about getting crystal clear about the challenges of other people rather than our own attributes or our own success stories. And as a result, what we do is we open the door to partnership because there's more trust, and it makes it easier to ask for external support. When we're okay with ourselves, we're then free to reach out for help. It is not an admission of failure. It is not an admission that we're not good enough. On the contrary, it's precisely because we are worth it that we're able to reach out for support. This brings very practical benefits to client management. Top of the list, you get to choose your clients rather than just be chosen by them. When you've got self-worth, the choosing isn't just one way. It's not just them choosing you. It's also you choosing them. And in a nice way, it's perfectly okay to let them know that. It means that when there are setbacks, as already discussed, there will be plenty of practice. When there are setbacks, we recover more quickly. I don't know of a way, even after 20 years of business coaching, I still don't know of a way to reduce the number of setbacks you're going to have. In fact, if I'm coaching you, I'll probably expose you to more. But what I hope happens, and what I see happen all the time, is that the recovery time, which often is in weeks and months, and in some cases years, particularly from bullying at work, to take one example. But what happens is the recovery time with self-worth becomes much, much shorter. So the recovery time goes back down to hours and days rather than weeks and months. And Jackie is saying, I have no volume but can see the conversation. Is everybody else hearing something? Just checking. I'll let the team perhaps correspond with you there, Jackie. So it allows you to recover quickly from setbacks, and in the same way, it allows you to set boundaries, particularly saying no. And again, the saying no to clients, no, that's not within the scope of what we're contracted to do, we will need to quote for that separately. That the having of those difficult conversations get easier. I won't ever say get easy, but they get a lot easier with self-worth. You become much more courageous in your questions. Now, this is a big one. This is a really significant. Madalena, I've just seen you've set the chat to private. Okay. Let me focus on the presentation. You will be more courageous in your questions. You will, with self-worth, you will ask questions up front, like, why are you doing this project? That you might not ask if you're focused on people-pleasing or making the client happy. In many ways, our job is to make the client think, not just to make the client happy. As a result, we're probably more calm and confident in meetings, even when dealing with aggressive people, because we realize this has got absolutely nothing to do with us. It's their problem, not ours. Your focus is, as I've already mentioned, on making clients think rather than make them happy. And the benefits don't stop there, but they extend to all of your business planning. One of the big ones is, not being contingent on results. Now, I know at a practical level, we sometimes have to be. So, if you're not getting results from your current CV or your current website or your current messaging, yes, you need to do something about that. Does it mean that you have to abandon your entire career or professional identity? Certainly not. But you may want to and need to position it differently. An awful lot of my day-to-day work is doing precisely that with people. And as a result, you're able to protect time for business development. Why? Because if you cannot set boundaries, it's very hard to protect time for biz dev. Or we make some practical mistakes, like doing it on Friday rather than earlier in the week. But whenever you decide to do it, you are at least able to protect that time and not just give it away to the next client that has a problem. Probably one of the big benefits comes from a clearer sense of purpose. A deep relationship with the why behind your business. And I don't just mean to make more money, and I don't just mean to be a professional success and have 20,000 followers on LinkedIn or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. That's if those are the definitions of success, then I would say you still have some work to do on your why. Why are these things important? What's the deeper meaning behind these things? It gives a consistency in energy and stamina for all of the above reasons. Why? Because the resilience time is, the recovery time is much, much quicker. You're able to make decisions, even tough ones. So if things aren't working in a particular way, you can call it early rather than struggle on trying to prove yourself. You can call the problem for what it is early on. If you need help or if you need some support that you don't have, you can reach out for that. Even if those decisions are difficult and even if those conversations are difficult, you can do it. And you're not afraid to get things wrong, which is a prerequisite for creativity. You can't be creative and be fearful of making mistakes. These are mutually incompatible objectives. So creativity is about making mistakes, is about attempting things that may or may not work, but at least being able to do so. As already mentioned, able to ask for help and get external perspective. And all of that, thinking of it as the little bubbles I showed earlier in the little bits and pieces of every day, this brings fresh energy to your business development. Okay, let's apply some of that. Before I do, I just want to make one general observation, which is I see more and more people, actually much more people than would have been true 10 or 15 years ago. And I do think that infotech is to blame here. I see more and more people doing the going it alone route, as in planning their own business development on their own, executing it day to day on their own with their social media feed, on their own with their messaging, on their own with their decision making. Very definitely on their own with the sense of responsibility for it all. And that isolation or professional loneliness, as I might call it, can be a crushing weight for anyone in biz dev. Business development's like cutting your hair. You know, you might have the skills, but the real challenge is perspective. And no matter how many mirrors you surround yourself with, it's going to be difficult to get that perspective if you don't have some trusted sounding boards to get that from. So as a result, what happens? Well, people can be missing vital feedback. They can be crafting messages, sometimes very sophisticated messages that nobody understands. There is a lot of social energy missing. Now, introverts perhaps suffer less from this than ambiverts, as I describe myself, i.e. a bit of both, need both, or extroverts. But social energy is a very important type of energy. It's that energy that you get when a number of people brainstorm a problem together. Of course, that also, one of the consequences is a lack of perspective, as I hope the illustration shows. And in the end of it all, you're left having to tell your own story. As I've alluded to earlier in the answer in commenting on Ian's question, or Ian's, it wasn't his question, his point, that you're left having to tell your own story because nobody else can. If we have gone it alone, if we've not got external perspective, and if we've not found collaborative ways. I really think that, you know, particularly if you're in marketing or if you're in biz dev yourself, explore the potential of collaborative marketing. Take news feeds, for example. Why is it that so many of them are only populated by one person? Okay, let's illustrate this in other ways. The classic place to where we see it, and it's very easy to see the difference between self-esteem and self-worth, is in meetings. In meetings where you find somebody desperately proving themselves, desperately conscious of their own performance, then the effect on everyone else is pretty much what's shown there. You can often read it in the body language. People looking away, staring at the window, staring down at their notes, just going, "Oh God, you know, this is just annoying." And what happens, a lot of very brash self-esteem biz dev performance is a bit like this. So we go in and we're trying to wow the client. I think if we're trying to wow the client, we're perhaps in the wrong business. We should have done showbiz instead. You know, if we're seriously interested in serving clients, it's not just about wowing them. The wow, if it happens, comes as a result of being useful to them. And self-worth is about focus on usefulness. The focus is not on our own performance, good or bad. The focus is on whether we are meeting the objectives. The focus is on the why behind the objective. What's the larger vision that all of this is driving towards? How will we know it's been successful? Self-worth allows us to do that and to ask some of these awkward questions in meetings. Yes, there are some current trends that can be discouraging. Let's name a few. The sheer amount of ratings that are going on everywhere and the incessant self-evaluation is but one. There can, for many, be a massive over-reliance on social media and messaging. I had a conversation with somebody recently on this very topic. She's a lot younger than I am, and there's a clue. And she was struggling to get her business up and running. She's been at it for about 2 years, doesn't really feel that she's got the following that she deserves, given all that she's done. And she had a look at, it was before she had a look at my previous site, so before Self-Worth Academy was put out there. And she went, "Yeah, you don't really have much of a social media presence. How are you in business at all?" And I laughed because there's, with some people, there's almost this belief that if you're not actually big on social media, then it's a miracle that you're still actually making any money. The reality, of course, is that business has been around an awful lot longer than social media has, and I know many successful independents who don't even have a website, never mind social media, and they're making very nice incomes. Thank you. So I think need to take a step back sometimes. These are useful tools, but if our entire focus has gone into raising the numbers of followers on Instagram, we might just need to rethink whether there might be other ways of actually building our reputation as well. And I'm not saying it's not important, and you will, I'm sure, notice if you're following us on Self-Worth Academy that we're doing a lot more on social media now than I ever did in my previous VCO business. For sure, that's true. It's a useful tool, but it is only one medium to reach customers, reach clients, and it's arguable still whether it's the best one. What's far more important, as I will come to in a moment, is conversations. By all means, let the social media happen as long as it's driving conversations. If you know, business is built on relationships, and relationships are built on conversation. So if we think of it as atoms and molecules, if the molecules of business development are good relationships, either with partners or potential clients, as the case may be, then the atoms of those molecules are conversations. So if you want to measure yourself on anything, let it perhaps not be by followers or reach on social media, but just ask yourself, how many good conversations are you having every day? Not only will that do wonders for your business development, it'll also do wonders for your energy. This cult of celebrity followers, I mean, some enjoy it, great. Others just find it irritating and discouraging. You probably best know where you are yourself. A habit that I come across a lot, I'm just reading Fabiana's comment. Social media and messaging has to be tailored to us. Indeed. This is very true. It's a needle in a haystack at the moment, and Grace has just added, and good conversations with ourselves. How very, very true that is. One of the points made in here is if we just upgrade the level of conversation that we're having with ourselves to the level we'd have with a friend, for some that already represents a significant advance, shall we say. Google grazing, what do I mean? But that's a bit of an old term actually, but it's the watching TED videos all day phenomenon. Let me sound a note of caution on that. There is now so much available there that by the time you've watched it all, you can end the day with a greater sense of inadequacy than when you began, because now you find another 20 things that you're not doing that you should be doing. So I'm not altogether sure some of this is productive. At the very least, I think it's wise to watch our diet, shall we say, when we're Google grazing or TED binging. And that professional isolation that I alluded to earlier. Okay, let's stop talking about problems. Very specific actions. And I'm hoping that these actions are done with the understanding that we've been covering in the last 15 minutes. Because if we just do the actions without the understanding, then we might just be burdening ourselves with even more problems than we had before. This one is taken from the book. There's a series of actions in the book in pages 206 to 209 if you've got it and you're looking for them. Here's one that I use all the time. I find it's very, very empowering because, like many people, I often go into a meeting either worrying about something else, or I'm going into that meeting trying to impress, or hastily trying to read up on them as I go into the room. And some years ago, I discovered, you know what? None of this is actually helping me in the meeting. If I haven't done the prep yesterday, or if I haven't done the prep a few hours ago, going into that building or dialing in for that call because it's the same thing, then now is too late. So instead, far more useful, set your intention. This could be an interview, by the way. This works very well in interviews. Rather than setting your intention to impress the board when you walk in with the intention of being useful, rather than how do you prove yourself or how do you prove anything to them. Try it. It sounds very innocuous, but believe me, I've had many conversations with people on the effectiveness of this and how much more calm and confident and relaxed they've been in meetings as a result. How can I be useful in this conversation? You can, in many cases, even ask them that. Number two, I said earlier that that business is, for the most part, in at least the kind of business most of us are in, business is built on relationships. They may be relationships that are very swiftly formed, but they are still relationships of trust. And the atoms of those relationships are conversations. So learning to have great conversations is the probably single biggest skill that I mentor and coach people on for the last 20 years. And in particular, to have what I call curiosity conversations, as opposed to presenting myself conversations. Because unfortunately, that's what a lot of people do. Again, it's a practical application of being interested rather than trying to be interesting. And I see Tommy's on the call. Thank you, Tommy. I always think of you when I say the next bit. You have an absolutely inalienable right that you do not have to earn, or you do not have to prove that you have it. You have an absolute right to be curious in any conversation with anyone you ever meet in the world, no matter how powerful they are, or important they are, or how much more or less experience, or no matter how different they might be from you in age or look or professional environment, wherever. You have an absolute right to be curious. You already have it. You don't even have to acquire it. The right, that is. We may have to acquire the skill, and many of us do profit from doing a bit of work on this. Learning how to have more curiosity conversations. Again, if you want to be specific about this, have at least one curiosity conversation every day. You don't have to use the word curious. You can, but it's a very, very powerful business development tool, massively underutilized. By the way, PS, do more conversations. I have worked with people who haven't had a conversation all week, never mind all day. Again, watch this isolation effect, which is now so endemic in professional life. Just on that last point, going slightly off piece for a moment, and timing myself so that I don't go too far. My belief is that there is more isolation now than there was 10 years ago. Why? Because 10 years ago, there were more people going to events, business events, breakfasts, conferences, networking get-togethers, whatever. Yes, it was a fashion, it was a phase. 10 years ago, no, a little bit more, 15 years ago. So the change started from about 2008. So up to about, particularly that first decade of the millennium, there was a huge explosion in fact, you didn't have to buy anything for your fridge. You know, you could eat out all week if you wanted. Certainly, if you lived in a major city, just by socializing, if you want. Now, whether all of this was productive or not is a very moot point, and it can be costly when you add up all the travel and the tickets and the time that it takes. However, at least there was less isolation. And now I think because of social and because of everything going online, there's more and more people retreating behind the screen. So my thesis is that there's more isolation around. I see Kylie has said, I organize professional development networking events and numbers have dropped noticeably. Exactly the point. Exactly that. Anti-social media. I'm not, John. I'm not, but I do question some, well, I question sacred cows generally whenever I come across them. And right now I think social media has become a ubiquitous refrain. That's the answer to everything. And it isn't, you know, it isn't the answer to everything. It is a tool, as somebody's already said, it's a channel. As you yourself said a few moments ago, it's a channel among many, and wise to use it as such. Wherever we are, whether we're on social media or not, Yes, you can be curious on social media, Tommy. Absolutely. You know, just imagine if we put more effort into commenting on and being curious about other people's posts rather than our own. Just imagine how much more relationships we'd all build. Looking at myself. Enough said. You absolutely can be curious on social media. You can also ask questions or ask for recommendations on social media, as I did just yesterday. Number three, you could talk about yourself in many ways, but what's perhaps more important than what you do, and notice we all tend to introduce ourselves in terms of what we do, webinar in February, talk less about what you do, more about why you do it. However, that why needs to somehow relate to the issues of others and not just be still more narcissistic self-preoccupation or worldview or philosophy, etc. I'll come back to that, John. I need to digest that last one. That why needs to relate to the issues of others and not just be still more about me. Fourth one, feedback. Negative feedback can cause a lot of difficulty in BizDev. I often spend an entire call with someone who's had negative critique of what they're doing, and often not from clients. To be honest, it's often from friends, you know, the well-meaning friend who actually tells them that what they're doing on LinkedIn is all wrong, or that they need to be more whatever, insert your own adjective. Feedback can be useful, can also be harmful. So the point I'm making here is choose whose feedback you listen to. And whenever you're receiving feedback, positive or negative, but particularly negative, then that's a time to be a really good friend to yourself. And when you get feedback, check it out with others first before you choose to rewrite your strategy or rewrite your CV or rewrite your entire life based upon the feedback that you're getting. Because a lot of people give feedback based on their own self-esteem issues. And therefore, what you're often getting is a projection of their experience or a projection of their view of the world or a projection of their need to affirm themselves by giving feedback to you. So, you know, maybe with self-worth, we can learn to at least, you know, choose the bits of feedback that you give credence to. And building on the theme of conversations, and hence using the same image, it's the same point, but as well as having a good conversation with somebody every day, I would suggest think partnership and think of having at least one good partner conversation every week. You know, if you do, you'll be quite surprised where this can lead. Now, you won't always know whether somebody is a potential partner or not until you have that conversation. And sadly, even from that conversation, you won't always know that they will do what they say they do. So I'm not saying that you won't get more practice with setbacks with this. But remember, as I said earlier, when I'm coaching somebody, I coach them to get more setbacks, not fewer. But whenever possible, try to have at least one partner conversation every week, whether that's with an agency or a different company doing the same thing or whatever it might be, but somebody who might potentially be a partner. Open-ended, focused on them, great opportunity to use curiosity questions, as Tommy has just alluded to. Can you use it on social media? You can. You very definitely can be curious with partners as to what their audience needs more of, etc. Okay, time check, quick check. I felt the discussions were not easily found. Yeah, Netta have just started a Facebook group about sustainable entrepreneurship and explained the reason why you started it, because you felt that the discussions in other groups were not easily found. There we go. That's an illustration of the why as well as collaboration. Okay, Daily habits. I used to use the phrase accumulation of marginal gains, borrowing it from David Brailsford. Ever since I read that some of the marginal gains that he was training the cycling team involved actually use of medication, I'm not altogether sure I want to be too associated with this. However, the philosophy of many small changes amounting to a lot more energy really does apply. So whether you like David Brailsford or not, if you're not sure who he is, Google him. Best of luck. Uh, let's stay with the flow here. Craft your own self-worth mantra, whatever it might be. Just be aware that the words and the meaning behind it is explained in here. Don't need to repeat it today. But as it applies to business development, so if you have a generic one, then okay, find one that applies specifically to your biz dev. Hint, perhaps something about the why you're doing it would be good, and not something that's going to create conditions for satisfaction. So what would a good example be? I can hear you ask. What approach do you stand for, whether other people want it or not? Whatever you decide the answer to that is, that could be your self-worth mantra. We're 100% clear what it is at, well, sorry, I am 100% clear what it is at Self-Worth Academy, because it's the subtext of that book. There's a surprising amount of work went into, which is valuing ourselves and our work. That's what my every day-to-day action is about. Supporting, first of all, myself, and secondly, everyone around me, to value themselves and their work. That's my intention. Doesn't mean I always achieve it. It doesn't mean that there aren't setbacks. It doesn't mean many things, but it means there is an anchor phrase to come back to no matter what's going on. Even if it's raining out there, I can still come back to, okay, how do I value myself and my work, even though I cannot do what I was planning to do. And where possible, create an accompanying action. Those who've done LP will know about the power of anchoring. Create an accompanying action around that so that you physically anchor that in your body. Working in small time blocks. We often in business development, we're looking for this clear day or half day when we're going to write that thing or start that other thing, or crack LinkedIn or whatever it might be. The reality is those big blocks don't come around very often. And even when we do, we're often not too sure what to do with them. Think 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maximum 15. What do you want to get done in the next quarter of an hour? What do you want to think about as you're going for a walk to the post office? Those frequent short breaks, which might well be not thinking about work while you walk to the post office, but whatever they are, small time blocks, frequent short breaks. When you're doing calls or anything that needs energy, do it while walking or standing or waiting. But do it during a time that you're actually on the move. Yes, there might be some background noise, etc., but the amount of energy that you're going to have on that call, or the amount of energy that comes across from you, will be higher. Breaks. Thomas Leonard, one of my all-time heroes, used to say that you need 1 week off every 3 months. That was his golden rule. Entrepreneur needs a week off every 3 months. Why? Because the depth of our attachment to our business is almost a parent-child relationship, and we need that week away every 3 months. The frequency is more important than the duration. So taking August off every year might be nice, but you'll be brain dead long before next August. What's more important is to take 1 week off every 3 months. Zoning the diary, again, a practice I pretty much cover with everyone I coach. Client time, biz dev, admin time, and I might add free time. But for most of us, these are the 3 big blocks. What are your client days or hours? What's your biz dev days or hours? What's your admin days or hours? You cannot afford to leave any of those neglected. And by the way, try to make sure, as a rule, I know there's many different professions on the call, but really, you have a full practice at 60% of your week at client time. So that's 3 days, basically. If you're doing more than 3 days a week of client time, unless you are an interim manager and you're, obviously working 5, sometimes 6-day chunks during big changes. But if you have multiple clients, by and large, your financial model should point to full practice at 60% client time. Why? Because you need the rest for biz dev, admin, and just general recovery, reading, research, etc. Equip others to tell your story. This is the power of conversation. This is the power of relationships. If you get other people telling your story, they will be able to put you in touch with the right people at the right time, rather than broadcast all the time, hoping that, a client will emerge out of every blog. If you can equip others to tell your story, now you've got partners. Now you're multiplying the power of what you do, rather just adding to the power of what you do. That's those who are positive, of course, but often that involves a bit of disconnecting from some people as well. Disconnecting from those that are the energy drains, if you like. And finally, I couldn't end a session on energizing without talking about physical self-care. Obviously, there's so much out there on that I'm not even going to take the lid off it, but just the power of drinking enough water, for example. That's even before we go to food and carbs and sugar and coffee and all the other stuff, and sitting all day. The power of physical self-care to energize a professional activity is huge. Upcoming events, I see Isabel has already shared one of them with you. Thanks, Isabel. May the 8th, if you're in London in the evening, you're very welcome to the launch of Self-Worth Safari. The links will be in the follow-up email. It's the last launch. We've done the Brussels one. We had the Lisbon one last night. So the London one, the one we've been building up for some time, is in Bloomsbury, London Review Books bookstore, beautiful venue. So the champagne corks will be popping on the evening of May the 8th. Yes, you are invited. A link will be in the email. As Isabel has already alluded to, there's next webinar is on the future. Actually, the next few webinars are going to be on the theme of the future. So while I'm talking about that, here's an invitation to, in the email, if there's a particular question you'd like to see covered, either as part of or in all of a webinar for the autumn, summer, autumn, as pertains to your future, whether it's your future biz dev or client acquisition or pricing or planning or marketing or whatever, please do email me. My email address is at the bottom of the list. Quite a few people have expressed interest in the facilitators course, 3 people last week. It's November the 3rd to the 10th. It's the Self-Worth Facilitators course, a 1-week end-to-end coaching program running in Portugal from 3rd to the 10th of November. For those who would like to have some individual support with their marketing or business development, and particularly with how to not only make it more effective, but to make it more enjoyable at the same time. One of the thrills of what I do is watching people enjoy their business development more rather than suffer from it. That doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but it comes. And that joy is a game changer in biz dev. And finally, if there's anything that you'd like to see covered in future webinars, we really are reaching out now for topics. So if you'd spare a moment, maybe after the call, and just have a quick think about what you'd like to see covered, because the more you tell us what to do, then the more tailored this will be to your needs. Thanks to everyone for your participation. Really enjoyed watching the chat. Sorry to the comments that I missed. I'll be following up with the downloaded version later on. And for anything else about us, see selfworthacademy.com. Have a nice afternoon, everyone. Bye for now.